The night I finally walked over to her porch, her light was off for the first time in 4 months. I stood there in the dark like a man who had rehearsed a speech only to find the auditorium empty. I knocked anyway. She opened the door in a gray sweatshirt and bare feet, and she looked at me the way people look at something they stopped expecting to happen. Not surprised. Past surprised, like she had already buried the version of this night, and here it was, standing in her doorway uninvited. I said, "Your light is off." She said, "I know." That sentence did something quiet to the room. My name is Daniel Hartley. I'm 34. I do project estimates for a commercial flooring company, which is about as interesting as it sounds, and I live in a rental duplex on Clearfield Street that I have been threatening to leave for 2 years and somehow keep not leaving. I have a toolbox I use twice a year. I buy the same brand of coffee every week and feel a small, embarrassing amount of loyalty about it. I am not, by any clinical measure, a man who notices things. Except, apparently I noticed her. Her name was Nora Voss. She moved into the other half of the duplex 4 months and 11 days before this story ends. Which I know, because the first thing she said to me was, "You left a box of my stuff by your door." And the first thing I said to her was, "That's technically your stuff that ended up at my door." And she looked at me like she was deciding whether to be annoyed or entertained. She was 31. She worked as a copy editor for a mid-size academic press, which meant she read other people's sentences all day and thought very precisely about what was wrong with them. She had dark hair she kept in a knot and a pair of reading glasses she held rather than wore, like a prop she carried in case she needed to indicate she was about to be serious. She had a laugh she seemed to feel slightly embarrassed about, the real one, the loud one that came out before she could replace it with the politer version. And she had a porch light. It was one of those amber glass fixtures, the older kind that throws a warm circle rather than a cold beam. Every night at dusk it came on. Every night I noticed it. I told myself I noticed it the way you notice a neighbor's recycling bin, or whether the paper has been collected. Just part of the peripheral inventory of living next to someone. I was lying, but I was very consistent about it. We had become friends in the minor, unsatisfying way of people who are thrown into proximity. We shared a wall and a front path. We had a running dispute about whose rosemary bush had technically crossed the property line, which neither of us resolved, because neither of us actually wanted to. She knocked on my door twice about parking. I knocked on her door once to return a jacket she had left on the shared railing, and once to ask if she had a Phillips head screwdriver, which she did, and which she handed over with the look of someone who had expected this visit. The existing dynamic, if I am being precise, was 2 people circling the fact that they liked each other while maintaining a mutual agreement to pretend the circling was not happening. I am not proud of how long this went on. The night the arrangement cracked was in October, about 6 weeks before the porch light went off. There was a cold front moving through, one of those early ones that arrive before anyone is ready for it, and I had come home to find that the shared gutter between our 2 sides had backed up and was sending water down her front steps. I knocked. She answered in work clothes, still in her jacket. Clearly just home. She looked at the gutter, looked at me and said, "I was going to deal with it." "I know," I said. "I'm just taller." She stepped back and let me past her to get to the side access, and while I was doing the least heroic maintenance task a man can perform, she went inside and came back with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed me one when I came down the ladder. The coffee was too hot to drink. Neither of us said anything about it. We stood on her porch while the temperature dropped and the street got quiet, and the amber light threw its circle around us, and she said, without any particular lead-up, "Do you ever feel like you've been in the same month for a year?" I looked at her. She looked like she hadn't meant to say it out loud. But she didn't take it back. "Most months feel like that," I said. She nodded once, slow, like I'd confirmed something she'd been arguing with herself about. Then she took the mug back, went inside, and said goodnight through the screen door, in a voice that was very normal, and not at all like someone who had just said something true. Her light stayed on all night. I went inside and stood in my kitchen for longer than I should have. That was the first crack. I told myself it was a cold night and shared maintenance and decent coffee. I told myself what I'd seen in her face was tiredness and nothing more. I am a skilled liar when the subject is myself. The second crack was 3 weeks later. I came home late on a Wednesday to find a note tucked into my door, not my mailbox. My door, the gap at the top of the frame where a note would need to be deliberately placed by someone of her exact height. It said, "Rosemary Branch update. Still technically on your side." Formally conceding the territory. I stood in my hallway reading it twice. There is a category of action that is so small it could be dismissed as nothing, and so deliberate it could not possibly be nothing. This was that. I did not knock on her door that night. I told myself it was too late. I folded the note and put it in the kitchen drawer where I keep things I don't know what to do with. And then I made dinner and thought about her handwriting for an amount of time I am choosing not to specify. Her light was on when I looked. The third crack I did not witness directly. I heard it from my own living room. She was on her porch. It was a Saturday afternoon, and her phone was on speaker, and I was not listening. I was simply existing near an open window, which is technically different. The voice on the other end was female, familiar sounding from previous overheard fragments. A close friend, maybe a sister. I heard the friend say, "You are describing someone you like." I heard Nora say, "I'm describing my neighbor. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Silence. Then Nora said, "It's not a good idea." "Why?" Another silence. Then, very quietly, "Because I don't know. He feels like somewhere I'd want to stay." I stopped moving in my living room. I think I stopped breathing for a moment. I have poor survival instincts around quiet, precise women. "That's a reason to pursue it," the friend said. "Not a reason to hide in your house with the light on." Nora said something I couldn't hear. Then the porch went quiet. I did not knock on her door that day. I want to be clear that I understand in retrospect how that reads. At the time I told myself she'd said it felt like somewhere she'd want to stay, not somewhere she was willing to go. And I was operating on a reading of those words that has not aged well under closer examination. I was, to use the technical term, a coward. 2 weeks later, the light went off. It wasn't immediate. It was gradual, the way things are when someone is making a decision rather than having an accident. The first night it came on an hour later than usual. Then 2 hours later. Then it came on, but was off before I got home. Then one Tuesday night, I looked at her side of the porch. And it was dark, and she was clearly home, because her car was there, and her kitchen light was on. And I stood at my window for a long time, thinking about what it meant that someone who kept a light on every night had stopped. I told myself she'd changed the bulb. I told myself she was conserving electricity. I told myself a lot of things that I don't believe were ever really about the light. On the fourth dark night I went over. I knocked. She opened the door. I said, "Your light is off." She said, "I know." We looked at each other in the dark. She said, "Did you need something?" I said, "No." She waited. I said, "I heard you on the phone a few weeks ago." I wasn't listening. But I heard. Something crossed her face. She looked away too quickly. Her fingers tightened once around the edge of the door. "Daniel, you don't have to say anything," I said. "I'm not here for that. I'm here because you turned your light off and I noticed I noticed, Nora. That's all I'm saying." She looked back at me. The kitchen light behind her threw a warm line across the doorframe, and she was standing in it, and she looked like a woman who had decided to put something down, but hadn't yet found a surface. "I turned it off," she said, "because I was tired of waiting for you to come over. The air went out of me." She said it quietly, not dramatically. The way she said everything true, like she was reading a sentence she'd corrected 100 times until it was finally right. "I've been over," I said. "Not like that." I said nothing. "I changed your name in my phone," she said. She was looking at the doorframe now, not at me, and her voice had dropped just a little. "Weeks ago, I kept. Whenever something happened during the day, I thought about who I wanted to tell, and it was always you. I changed it to something that made that easier to ignore." She paused. "It didn't work. What did you change it to?" She looked at me. She had the expression of a woman who had just realized her own mouth had been providing information without her consent. "Daniel from next door," she said, which I was hoping would feel less like a person I liked and more like a logistical contact. Something in my chest shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. I said, "It's not a good idea." I said it back to her, the exact words from the phone call. She heard them. She went very still. "That's what you said," I said. "That it's not a good idea. And then you said he feels like somewhere I'd want to stay." I've been thinking about that every day for 2 weeks, and I don't know how to do this carefully enough to deserve that. But I think you should know that every time something happened, I thought about you first. Every single time. Good and bad. You were always first. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. Not a dramatic gesture. Not a declaration. Just, "More room. Come in, if you're coming." I came in. She put the light on, the small lamp on the entryway table, not the porch, and she turned to me, and she was 2 feet away, and she said, "I've been over-editing you for months." "What does that mean?" "It means I kept taking out all the sentences that said what I meant and replacing them with safer ones." I said, "Stop editing." She looked like she almost smiled. Then she said, "I don't know how to do this carefully either." "That's okay," I said. "You should know I overanalyze silences. I know, and I argue about Rosemary. I'm aware." She said, "And I will probably read things you say and think about them for much longer than is reasonable." "Nora." "What?" "I know," I said. "I know all of it. That's why I'm here." She looked at me the way people look at a sentence that finally parses after 3 readings. Then she stepped forward, and I held her hand first. Just her hand, her fingers loose in mine, and she didn't move away. We stood there in her entryway with the lamp on and the porch still dark, and neither of us said anything for a long time. From somewhere down the hall, her phone buzzed on a hard surface. Twice, we both looked in that direction. Then she looked back at me. "That'll be Meg," she said. "She's been asking for updates. What are you going to tell her?" She considered. Then I turned the light back on. 3 months later, the porch light was on timers. This was Nora's innovation. She had done research, as she does, and decided the amber fixture should run from dusk until 11, and not until whenever one of us remembered, which she described as an unreliable system. I did not argue. The light was on every night, and I came home to it, and it felt, in a way I cannot make sound less sincere than it is, like an instruction I was always meant to follow. 8 months after that, she kept a spare key on my kitchen hook, and I kept her reading glasses on my nightstand, because she always set them down somewhere she couldn't find them in the morning. And we had argued twice about dishes, and once about a parking situation that was entirely my fault. And she had laughed her real laugh at me enough times that she had mostly stopped replacing it with the polite version. 2 years later, when people asked how we got together, she said, "He showed up because my porch light was off, and apparently that was the crisis that finally got him moving." I said it was less about crisis and more about understanding. Late, but not too late. That a woman who keeps a light on every night is telling you something, and a woman who turns it off is telling you something more urgent, and at some point you either listen or you don't. She looked at me when I said that. The way she looks at a sentence, that's exactly right. Nothing about us had changed, except everything had. What would you have done if the person you'd been circling for months stopped leaving the light on? And have you ever waited too long to say something true and then found out it wasn't too late after all? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.